So there is one seat empty, but I do suppose that we should wait no longer. So good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to welcome all of the panelists. Today we have had already a long day. Those of you who attended the morning high-level meeting today will probably also benefit from this interesting panel discussion on a rather acute problem, maybe painful problem, which is fighting economic crime. All of the names of the participants are on screen at the moment, and I would like to give the floor now to the rapporteur, the leader, or the chair of the FICIL Insolvency Issues Work Group, Ilse Snorting. We also have Martin Orzechewski from the Supreme Court. We have Ilse Ziro, the Director General of State Revenue Service. Next to her, we have Armīns Meisters, the head prosecutor for investigation of financial and economic crimes, Peters Bauska, also Ines Steiner, and also the representative of Anti-Corruption Agency. You escaped the camera, and they've been, sort of waiting on you and trying to hunt you down sort of for a while. This is the third panel, the same structure, the same rules of procedure, so to say. 5-minute introductory presentation from the rapporteur, followed by a roundtable sort of free-flowing discussion. So Ilse Snorting is going to give us the essence of the matter, if you will. So hello everyone, thank you for staying until the end and not losing the interest in this rather important issue, and I'm happy that this rather sort of tough discussion hasn't frightened you and you're not somewhere else sitting, drinking coffee and enjoying the sun. But let me start with a little bit of the history. Why did FICIL started, working on this matter, and why do we have this panel discussion today, panel discussion involving the representatives of the judges or the prosecution and the State Revenue Service. In 2015, FICIL was in fact the organization which sort of initiated this debate on the abuse of insolvency practices in Latvia. If you remember, in 2015, we specifically stressed that various legislative changes to the insolvency law are insufficient to effectively target or tackle this type of crime. It's about the enforcement, in fact, which is struggling, and we specifically emphasize that in Latvia we have a rather worrying trend that we can observe of the insolvency procedures being abused, and we were the first who asked or reached out to the government and asked the government to apply the same standard as to the public officials, to insolvency practitioners as well. So we've been also invited to take part in various work groups, and we have conducted the analysis of the financial losses stemming from the abuse of the insolvency procedures. So we've been deeply involved in sort of this national debate on the insolvency procedures, and what concerns our analysis or losses, we came to quite a shocking figure, and we concluded basically that in the past couple of years we'd lost around in the vicinity of 500 million from the abuse of the insolvency procedures. So, being a part of this, rather comprehensive debate on the insolvency, we concluded that we cannot focus on details or nuances. We have to, tackle the insolvency issue as a whole in order to improve the investment climate. And it's not only really about the insolvency, it's rather about, fighting economic crime, tax evasion, money laundering, illegal proceeds. All of that sort of damages the investment climate. What we see at the moment is that the financial crisis has led to a situation which has been also picked up by media and different public activists, to a situation that has not been analysed so far. And the situation is that we have rather organised crime which offers as a service tax evasion, for example. Nobody has really analysed why there are gangs that offer different insolvency solutions, if you will. Why are we still struggling with the influence of Russian criminal organizations here? And a shift of paradigms is needed, and we need to show the public and the government that we are able to efficiently prosecute economic crime, and we are doing what it takes, to prosecute efficiently economic crime. And our survey as well shows that only 5% of the local as well as foreign investors, only 5% in fact, trust the judicial system, and even less trust the police. It's roughly 40%. It's not good, really. And then we also asked, do you think that the punishment for the economic crime is fair? 70% said that we're not happy with the way those economic crimes have been prosecuted. We don't think that there is a fair there are fair investigating and prosecuting practices. And we decided that we as FICIL, we cannot, keep our mouths shut, and we cannot let this, go on the way it has been. And, if economic crime is not being investigated or not being prosecuted, if companies or, business entities are not being prosecuted, that damages the state budget, and that also damages or hurts the trust in the democracy. It also contributes to larger shadow economy. It brings down tax revenues, and there are other losses, intangible losses apart from financial losses. So on one hand, we know that the economic crime is at a high rate. Prosecution is struggling to work efficiently. Prosecution, or the PGO, Prosecutor General's Office, is also struggling to efficiently prosecute these cases because they don't have competent investigators. And that leads to a question, how to solve it, how to make it better, and that's why we have prepared a position paper where we've identified those problems and also offered recommendations on how to solve those problems. So that's it in a nutshell. Well, thank you, Ilse. You might remember that we used to live in a system or in a society when there were only two questions in a similar situation: who's guilty and what to do now? Do you remember, or should I, say it in Russian for you to remember? Anyway, this is not really important, but as we see, the picture is rather grim, but can you give us, the basic facts and figures as to the losses, for example? Well, the only sort of figure that we have is the financial losses resulting from the abuse of insolvency procedures, and we have concluded that over the past 8 years, it has amounted, those losses have amounted to 500 million, and it will continue in the same manner unless we change something about the insolvency procedures. But when it comes to other economic crime, according to the European Commission, Latvian economy is losing roughly 50% of its GDP annually due to corruption. When it comes to tax evasion, it's 1 to 1.5 billion that we lose, and we could continue in the same manner, and the figures are rather shocking. And the government is now trying to find, for example, the money or the funding for the health reform. Maybe we should make economic crime prosecution much more efficient, and we should seize the monies that have been illegally obtained. And now you've started talking about solutions already, and we'll get to that. And that's the way we sort of structured our panel discussion in the previous sessions. We started to identify the problem, or the scope of the problem, rather, and then we basically led the whole discussion towards the solutions. Now, I'll give you the floor, and you will not be discriminated based on your gender position, and so on and so forth. I'll give each other an opportunity to express your opinions. And here's my first question. Do you think that in your particular area, or at the government level, those working in the area or in the government, whether they are fully aware of the losses stemming from the economic crime. What are the figures, and what do you think about the figures that Ilse mentioned, those estimates either by Latvia or by the European Commission? Valdemars Čiževskis, we'll start with you then. Hello, and I'm actually from the appeal court. And the Supreme Court, as the ultimate appeal court, does not really have any precise figures as to the losses. We don't have, millions or amounts or billions or whatever. We don't have the figure or the number, really. This is something that mass media are keen to give, if you will, because Supreme Court has very few economic crime cases, or economic crime proceedings. And he also talked about the insolvency abuse. I'm looking at my sort of case log. I can't even remember, when I had a case of insolvency. I mean, we are the sort of the final instance court, and sentences are read, everything is fine, there's no further appeal, and we have had, some administrators before, our judges who've abused. But you do know what is happening in the system. What is your feeling? Losses big, small, billions, millions? What are your feelings? Well, I would say that the losses are huge. And although I'm not responsible for the investigation, I am nevertheless supervising the investigation and looking at the financial crime units. They are, fighting the best they can, and they are doing a lot of things. And you can see that, there's something happening, there's something, boiling there, but we don't really see it in court. And the other feeling that I get is that the financial crime unit is struggling. They are struggling to collect the evidence because, the sort of range of suspects is so big that, it takes them a lot of time to identify the actual suspects and so on and so forth. Now, let's talk about problems later, but Madam Tīro, what are your figures and what's your feeling, what's the impression? Well, I am dealing with figures all the time, and I have the figures, and we have been hosting for the past 7 years a shadow economy or grey economy conference, and one of the researchers of SSC Riga, Arnis Saug, has been presenting during those annual conferences about the size of the grey economy in Latvia, which is very close to what Ilse mentioned, and we are on daily basis tracking the tax losses, which we call in our sort of technical sort of jargon, a tax gap. We see that indeed some 15% roughly of taxes are not being collected because they are in sort of the grey or the shadow area. And the classical type of crime is the VAT fraud plus undeclared work. So VAT fraud is based on to estimate the grey economy. And what about contraband or smuggling? Well, we are looking at, we do take into account the smuggling amounts based on the customs figures. The losses, the financial losses resulting from the smuggling are not that big. 600, 700 million cigarettes a year from a tax point is probably 70 million losses. What about alcohol and other excise goods? Have you added that? But you would say that those figures are roughly the way Ilse presented them. Let's leave the problems for later. Yes, and like court, prosecution doesn't really collect the statistics of this sort. We sort of draw our conclusions from the trends that we see. based on the cases that we get, cases that we either prosecute or either supervise, we can see the extent of economic and financial crime, and I would see that the trend is, an upward one, not a downward one. Whenever there is a possibility to benefit financially or enrich yourselves, then it is very lucrative to commit such an offence, be it a tax fraud or excise fraud. Whenever it is possible to game the system and benefit financially, the offences or the type of crime is very widespread, and people are very, very sort of creative, if you will. Criminals are really creative, and they are ahead of us most of the times, and they find all sorts of loopholes or gaps to enrich themselves. Mr. Balsko, what's your opinion? Well, considering that we are the ones that are fighting the consequences for most part of the cases, we don't really collect statistics of that sort. We don't do the trend analysis. We rather have a very specific statistics or figures of how well we are doing in terms of fighting economic crime, and we are doing quite well. Let me just give you some of the figures from the last year. For example, crime unit has recovered 54 million through court judgments or court rulings. So 54 million have been recovered, and we're talking about goods worth more than 100 million. Mostly those are excise tax that are sold without paying excise tax, and also luxury cars are there. I think that we are doing fine, and we're working quite successful. We could always do better, but that's the way it is. What's the budget of your institution? Annual budget? Well, I'm from the economic crime unit. We don't have our own budget. We're in. We have the police budget. This wasn't to check whether you're on budget or not. I just wanted to understand how much money you have. If you said that you have recovered 54 million, just wanted to sort of understand how much we are paying for what you're doing to recover this sum, and whether you are sort of yielding any profit or not, if you will. Well, the total police budget is a bit more than 100 million, and what's your share of the pie? I don't want to boast, but it's big. On the expense side, not on the recovery sort of side. Well, we're not good at figures. You're the economist. We can't give you the figure. We are part of the police budget. We could do the math, of course, but I just wanted to show that you are basically recovering more than you are sort of consuming from a budget point of view. I think yes. I think that's true. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, just post it through the internet, because otherwise we'll have chaos, disputing, discussing. So what do you think, Ines, about the numbers, and what are your numbers if you don't agree? Now, what concerns the figures, the Insolvency Administration does not collect that sort of statistics, and we don't have the trend analysis. And what concerns FICIL analysis, we have also conducted our own analysis, and we have also analyzed what is happening. We consulted different sources, and we have also, analyzed or examined different fraudulent practices. What concerns losses, yes, I would agree to the losses that Ilse presented. That's our view as well. But I would also like to underline that the FICIL analysis has contributed greatly to what we are doing, and it has also triggered some political processes as well. There are insolvency administration. There's insolvency administration strategy that has been adopted now, very specifically highlighting the sort of the areas in which we need to improve, and that will, of course, sort of spill over on the practices as well. And, FICIL greatly contributed to the improvement of work of the Insolvency Administration, and they gave us the sort of the business perspective, which is very important, because we're in the public administration, and we see things from one angle, and they, sort of brought in another angle. But about the figures, well, the figure, yes, more or less, I don't have my own figure. You said that you don't have your own separate analysis, but do you believe that this figure is correct? Yes. And you agree that the problem is huge? Yes, I agree. Mr. Rosa, what do you think about the losses? And you're more sort of responsible for the corruption and the losses that it creates, but nevertheless, about the financial losses, I think that the State Revenue Service knows the exact figures. And they said that they agree with the FICIL figure. So we also have to agree to this figure. But we see, we have the figures or the statistics for corruption. 15% of the GDP, do you agree to that? The grey economy and the corruption? Well, the figure, you see, well, there are different aspects at play here, and we can't give you a similar figure because it sort of changes from year to year and depends on what's happening. But more or less, yes, I might agree. So basically you're saying that corruption is a huge problem, or offences, including corruption, have a huge problem. So, okay, now we have a consensus. It's a huge problem. Everyone agrees that this is a major problem. But nobody can give us precise figures as to the losses. I do assume that different government bodies have not had the analysis, especially the judiciary system has not had any analysis as to the losses that it has generated. But nevertheless, what is the sort of the national strategy to fight or to combat economic and financial crime? There are a lot of problems that in our country that are not as big. I mean, this is probably the biggest problem that we have in Latvia, and the figures are there, and you can just imagine, what you could fund from this money if you would get it, healthcare, defense, and so on and so forth. But Mr. Rosa, we'll start from the other end. What is your suggestion? How should we solve this problem, and do you have a strategy? Yes, well, there is strategy. There are different working groups, economic crime working groups, and there are different law enforcement agencies that are working hard in the scope of these working groups, and it's a work in progress, so to say. The efforts are ongoing, and we're looking for solutions, and let's see what we agree on. But what are the strategic objectives you want to achieve? What would be the ways of recovering or getting back those 15%, or collecting rather those 50% in tax revenues? Now, what concerns corruption or the anti-corruption agency, well, as the name says, we are responsible not only for the corruption but also for the prevention of the corruption, and those figures are rarely, published or publicly announced as to how many attempts to corrupt public officials have been actually prevented. But going back to our strategy, the strategy identifies the key areas that we should control closer, and this is exactly what we are doing. But it will take some time to see the results. Could you please voice those areas again, the priority sectors, if you will? Well, the Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau is focusing on construction, healthcare, and from the top of my head, I can't remember the other sectors. Public officials, most probably. Yes, definitely public officials. And, corruption is about public officials, of course, that's for granted. So, Madam Steiner, what are you doing? What are your strategic priorities? Well, when it comes to insolvency, there are several strategic objectives we are focusing on at the moment. First of all, there are very strict or very rigorous eligibility criteria for the insolvency practitioners. Once in 2 years, they have to go through requalification, and they have to basically show that they are still eligible to perform the insolvency duties, and that they are competent, still competent as the insolvency practitioners, considering that the insolvency practitioners may be also punished in an administrative manner, and today we have the first administrative case. So this is a historic day. Yes, Cabinet Administrative Regulation was adopted not so long ago, and we have the first administrative hearing today, and 4 insolvency practitioners will be hopefully punished today, administratively punished today. And transparency is also something that we are heavily focusing on. We are supervising or supervisory body, so we need a transparent system to be able to supervise it. We need to know what is happening. So as of 1st July next year, we'll launch a new system. All the insolvency cases will be publicly available, or there's going to be a rather portal or web page. And why am I saying that July next year? Because it takes some time to prepare the system. So what sort of information will be available there? Well, the reports, the insolvency reports that are being submitted by the practitioners. So basically on a quarterly basis you'll be able to see how much money they make and why they are so rich and so on and so forth. Yes, that's exactly, there are deadlines that they have to meet, and that will be launched next July. And more transparency, of course, will make sure that we as a supervising body, we are certain that, all insolvency practitioners are compliant with the law and their practices are in compliance with the law. And again, we are improving. Another strategic priority that we are working on is the supervision system or supervisory practices, and starting from 1st of July we can also sort of perform on-the-spot checks, if you will, at the insolvency practitioner practices, and we can basically sort of search their premises, if you will, and audit their premises rather, to see whether they are working well. You, as the new director of insolvency administration, do you have any other sort of personal priorities on top of the ones that you already listed? Well, mostly I'm going to focus on those that I already presented, and this also links with other things. But what is one thing that you go to bed at night and then wake up in the morning? Well, my top priority is to make my organization run smoothly and build a strong organization. We need a strong team that is working, towards the common objective, that is qualified, competent, aware of new types of crime that are emerging, and is capable of efficiently tackling this crime as well. So this is about building a strong team, really. Mr. Balskas, you have fans. There are a lot of comments in Slido, by the way, and they are saying, why, if you're so important, you're living in such a deteriorated or dilapidated house? So somebody has really seen your house from the inside, and they are asking if you have a proper premises. So I'll ask the question about how to support you later, because you're so important for us. You mean the house? No, I mean how to support your enforcement work. But what's your strategy? What are your priorities? What are your plans? Now, when it comes to economic crime unit, we've gone through restructuring lately, serious restructuring, and our staff, if you will, has been restructured, reshuffled rather, depending on the new priorities. But I'll leave it at that. All in all, the state police has been also reorganized and restructured, and a new organized crime unit, subunit has been created, which will deal with severe crime or more serious crime. Specific types of crime. It's a new unit, and they are creating the team, and there's also an asset recovery unit that has been created, and colleagues are sort of building now the capacity of this unit, but they have basically the same priorities: to boost the quality of pre-trial investigation, and the key sort of principle here is cooperation with the PGO or Prosecutor General's office, and monitoring as well. Can you clarify, please? We hear cooperation this, cooperation that, cooperation or interagency cooperation, and interagency response and interagency cooperation, law enforcement cooperation. What should this cooperation look like between PGO and the police? This would be a sort of a strategic cooperation to agree on a joint strategy and operational cooperation as well. We have to cooperate on cases. Economic crime is not a simple crime, and it's not limited in terms of time. I'm sorry. Those are crimes that have taken place over a longer period of time, so we need to have those operational meetings to discuss various operational matters. That's something that we should also continue and strengthen in the future. Mr. Meisters. Now, when it comes to prosecution, economic crime is something that has been a priority for us since 2011, when the then Prosecutor General determined that economic crime is a priority for the PGO, and he also issued instructions or house rules as to how the prosecution should conduct investigation or prosecute those cases, what they should do when the pre-trial investigation hands them the case for the prosecution. And considering the grey economy combating plan and its requirements starting from this year, when the case is already in trial, in order to ensure that we are supervising or prosecuting these cases in a uniform manner and that the penalties are also based on the same principles, starting from this March we have special control division or internal sort of control mechanisms, if you will, to ensure that we have uniform practices. And of course, priorities, they change depending on the on the trends. Last year, insolvency came to focus. State police, together with prosecution, sort of focused heavier on the insolvency cases or that have been reported to the police, and prosecution on a daily basis was working very closely with the police on those insolvency cases. So that was a priority last year, and that required a lot of our attention and resources. Last year, also the AML was our priority, anti-money laundering, or money laundering was our focus. So both of these priorities are still valid today, if you will, and are at our focus. So these are the priority areas. Now, if you take the last 6 months, these are the two biggest priorities. But financial and economic crime is a priority for us ever since 2011, when the then again PG Prosecutor General sort of identified this is how we work. Madam Ziro, you who became the Director General not so long ago, you must have been thinking about the priorities and what those priorities are. Yes, we as a government body, we've been looking at this more broadly, because law enforcement is basically combating, the consequences of fighting the consequences of investigating the crime, whereas we see it a bit broader. We haven't done enough to prevent it. Let's now integrate some of the questions. A question to you, personally. Financial crime unit, should they be a part of your organization, or should they probably be a part or a unit, or should they be integrated or incorporated in police structure? Well, I don't mind. This is very, sort of logical, self-evident. But, it's like, where should we put our internal investigations unit? We offered 5 different scenarios for that, and then we also consulted the practices of other countries, and it suggested that we should merge the customs and police, customs unit with the tax unit. So that was very important. Now, as regards to priorities, one of our priorities is to avoid any offences, and when it comes to smuggling, we need to equip the customs with the top of the state equipment with X-rays, scanners, so that you can't smuggle cigarettes and avoid paying tax. In other words, we have to tighten the controls on the border. And this is something that we'll do together with customs, and we'll have the sort of customs monitoring center in our building, which will basically monitor, will surveil all the border crossing points. So you're basically trying to solve any or avoid any human errors through technical means, by technical means. Yes, so we're prioritizing also tax evasion. We're introducing reverse VAT systems in new areas. We are trying to create white lists, so to say, or rather blacklists, and trying to blacklist those dishonest companies. And when it comes to management is being prosecuted of those companies, but it doesn't really affect any shareholders. Yes, there was a question, has any of the chairmen of the board ever been prosecuted for economic crime? Yes, Ilse is saying that there are people. But this is about the owners, the beneficial owners, if you will, or the owners, not, or the shareholders. Yes, basically shareholders have sort of sacrificed the CRBs. So, going back to the State Revenue Service, we have the blacklists, and we are banning, for life, probably also some of the dishonest CRBs from taking the CRB positions in future if they have evaded tax or have tried to defraud or game the system. That's one thing. And then we are also working with business associations, with particular industries, with private sector. With private sector, yes. We are very much focusing also on the construction sector. The whole country is basically following what's happening in the construction sector. We have to show, as the supervisory body, that we are also contributing to sort of improving the construction sector. And, that we have also in the FICIL, we can discuss that, if you will, the construction sector. And then, yes, we are also cooperating with the PGO. From our point of view, it's important to make sure that the leading prosecutor is, there from the day one, because financial crime is a very complex type of crime, and there are a lot of, suspects involved, a lot of individuals involved, so the quality of evidence collected is very crucial. So we are focusing on this evidence so that the prosecution can really prosecute those cases instead of giving them back to us and asking for more evidence. Now, what about the Supreme Court? Well, judiciary is a sort of an independent branch of power. We are working based on criminal law, criminal procedure law. So whatever case is being brought by the prosecution or any appeals that get brought before the court is what we are dealing with. I can't, talk on behalf of the other courts. But now, when it comes to strategy, I suppose that the Judiciary Council should be, the one that is asked this question. And what would they say then? Well, I don't know what they would say. I mean, we don't have that legislative power. The court does not have the legislative power. We can't suggest or initiate a new legislation. But what do you think? What's your concern? Well, the Supreme Court is very much concerned about the VAT evasion or VAT fraud. It's a problem for a number of years. It's been a problem for a number of years, and we have had heated disputes with the State Revenue Service on what to change, maybe change the VAT formulas and so on and so forth. But I think, to solve this problem, going back to sort of solutions, we should change the law, especially on VAT, and we should specify whether it's an evasion, whether it's a fraud, or detail the different types of VAT crimes from a law point of view, so that there is no sort of room for interpretation. Because, there's only tax evasion clause in our law, or section in our law, but it doesn't specify, it doesn't break down, by different types of this kind of offense. Sometimes it's called fraud. Sometimes it's called evasion. Which cases do you qualify as evasion and which as a fraud? And we have been we have provided our recommendations as to how to interpret different types of offences from a legal point of view, but there are a lot of, gaps or blanks, if you will. We should specify rather, the VAT legislation. It's so difficult, so complex, that you can, use your sleep because of that. And, those offenders are very smart. Now, does State Revenue Service have any plans to simplify the VAT legislation? Can you do it? Well, you see, the VAT is subject to European, legislation and European directives, and VAT is indeed, a sore issue for the whole Europe, and now European countries have come together and are looking for solutions regarding VAT legislation. Now, I have a question, time flies, but I have a question. I don't have much time left, nevertheless. Can you name one key problem that you need to eliminate in your particular area in order to, bring down the economic crime? Because it's a huge, major problem, and I love what Madam Tiro mentioned, that this sort of goes out to the corruption bureau or anti-corruption agency, that the best way to prevent corruption is to fight the root cause. Do you have any bottlenecks, any problems, roadblocks that, if crushed, could help bring down the economic financial crime? You talked about criminal procedure, but what other problems do you see? Well, the efficiency of investigation, the speed of the investigation, the speed or the efficiency of prosecution is the problem. But what are the problems? Well, the financial crime unit investigates and prosecutor's office prosecutes, bluntly speaking. But when the case gets to the court, then, then we get to the detail, and as you know, the devil is in detail. So charges have to be almost perfect in order to avoid problems in court, because some claim that charges are too vague. Vague from which point of view? Defendant's point of view, although they know what they are guilty of. But so vague and washed out charges, that's a problem, as you say. Yes, for a bystander, it may be vague because, terminology is complex and the terms are heavy, if you will. But some say that the charges are too vague and indictments are too washed up. Well, one thing that I would change, and lately I've been, seeing a lot of finger-pointing, police pointing fingers at prosecution pointing fingers at, whatever, police or courts and so on and so forth. But, all in all, I think everyone will agree that we rather have ridiculously long trials. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's something that has to be, prioritized. And, if we're talking about economic crime, the digital gate, it has been dragging on for 10 years, which is insanely long and absolutely unacceptable, and, needs to be prosecuted, and there has to be a conviction. But let's stop finger-pointing. Let's start working together. Let's do things together. Well, I see what you're alluding to is that the courts are, not diligent in their ruling or case making. But let's get back to the problem. Madam Tiro mentioned a lot of problems, but which is that, sort of key problem that would have the domino effect? Well, it's about the quality indeed of the cases. Now, in order to deal with those cases, we should have at least 10% bigger staff. Where to get those additional people? I don't know. Because we don't have investigators or tax inspectors are working on investigation, but it takes time for you to requalify to investigation. But where can you learn the investigation? Well, it used to be police academy, but now that we don't have it, now we have to train them in-house. But what about the EU funding? Well, this is not about the sort of the basic training. This is about, sort of the professional level, if you will, expert level. Then we also have problem working with investigators from other law enforcement agencies, because they know that they will have the early retirement, and that's why they don't want to go to state revenue service as law enforcement employees. They will be able to retire early, so that's why we're not lucrative enough for them. And I remember American films, they offer, for example, offenders, instead of going to jail, to work for the FBI. If you've been caught red-handed, you are offered two options: either work for the FBI or go to jail. And those would be the best, investigators, the best, consultants. Well, yes, if you were at the grey economy, it would be an educated man with good language skills and IT skills. That would be the best sort of investigator, according to conferences, but that's not real life. Now, the bottlenecks, from the point of view of prosecution, that would have the domino effect, spillover effect, if you will. Well, Prosecutor General's office, like any other public body, has problems. We have staff constraints, so human resource constraints. We don't have qualified, knowledgeable people who are equipped to work with these cases. For example, the unit that I'm in charge of, the head prosecutor, his deputy, and 11 prosecutors are working. Only 11 people, and we have vacancies, which we are struggling to fill because the prosecutors are not ready to work on economic crime, shy away from economic crime. But it's nice, you have more money, to pay to the people, because you've got those vacancies, and there's money earmarked for those vacancies as well. But anyway, shortage of people, and it's a sort of a chronicle problem, if you will, which would, in case of a human body, would make people die, rather. So we are struggling, and this is constant, again, chronicle problem. And the Prosecutor General's office, is very much dependent on the investigators, or the quality of the investigation. If investigators are qualified enough to bring a quality case to the prosecutor that could then be efficiently also tried as well, then we have no problem, but we are struggling with the investigation, to put it mildly. But again, that's finger pointing, so please don't do that. And then there's the court. If the PGO sees that, trials are quite often sluggish. I mean, trial is sluggish, and there are all sorts of appeals, requests, legal, quasi-legal ways of prolonging the trial artificially. And in 2013, I sent a case to the court. 13 people were accused of defrauding the system and receiving undue sickness benefits, and it's now already the third year that it's being investigated, and it's not always about the investigation or prosecution, and now it's been tried for 3 years, I'm sorry. There's a representative of the FICIL member who's on our insolvency work group as well, and we celebrated with him a couple of weeks ago. He's a major victory in an insolvency case. It was a rather, criminal proceeding in 2009, was it, or 13? Nobody's even remembers what this case is all about. It's been dragging on so long that everyone has really forgotten how it all started. But, there you go. Here's your efficiency. But anyway, at least those 33% who are still there, they see that the justice has prevailed eventually. But now, let's go over to the questions. There's one question for you. How much of the 54 million were in fact recovered, physically recovered? Well, the court has ruled to recover those 54 million. I think that all 54 have been recovered. So it's physically there. It's been physically recovered. Okay, yes, thank you. Now, your bottleneck. Well, Mr. Meister just basically said everything, and there's nothing else to add, and I will not go into human resource constraints, complaints and that sort of thing. But let's take a broader look. We should focus more on the prevention so that we don't have to fight the consequences. We should create the system where it just does not make sense to commit the crime, and if you commit a crime, you know that you will be prosecuted and it's going to be painful, and you have to go through a lot of pain, and you will be convicted. And that's something that we have to do. We have to prevent the people. We have to show that we will severely punish anyone who commits an economic or financial crime. So you're saying that your bottleneck is that there's not a focus on prevention. Then okay, let's go even further. What should be done differently? You're part of this whole chain, if you will. So what should we do to prevent the people from committing those crimes? Let's take, for example, a tobacco smuggler. So you're caught red-handed with 10 boxes of cigarettes. So police catches you, so either you pay a penalty or you go to court. And that means probation or financial penalty, and so on and so forth. Then if you go, so that's about that. But that does not prevent them from reoffending, because they know the system, they know how to escape the system as well. And we had a reoffender who've reoffended 5-6 times and spent in jail a couple of years, 3 years, and of course he's returned to the same profitable business. So what are you suggesting then? What does your example mean? Should we speed up the investigation or what? Yes, quicker investigation and more severe punishments. That's the way I would see it. Well, I agree, but this is a very sort of systemic perspective. Madam Steiner, what are your bottlenecks? Let me study a case instead, or give you an example. Insolvency, losses, financial losses, we heard about that, but let's take our statistics now. In 2016, we reported 16 possible offences to the police. So they have applied freezing injunctions, and they could have applied freezing injunctions or freezing orders, and they could have prosecuted the crime. How many of those 16 have been in fact brought to the court? 0. So basically, we've reported those cases to the police, and this, as far as we go. We see a possible crime, we bring it to the police, but no orders, no freezing, no prosecution, no convictions, nothing. That's the way it is. Now, what about the anti-corruption agency? Well, considering that we are responsible for public officials, and we are also responsible for the prevention of the corruption, we are responsible for making it as difficult as possible to corrupt public officials. We are doing our best to prevent. We are basically using different control measures. For example, we cooperate with the Economic Crime Unit, and we cooperate with the prosecutors, and we might make sure that those prosecutors and investigators are sort of keeping a close eye on their cases, that they are on top of things, if you will. And why are you sighing? I mean, why does this make you sad? Well, it's because it's always about, human resource constraints. But, looking at your daily job, what are those bottlenecks? What are the things that sort of bring you down? When it comes to economic crime, IT skills or IT proficiency is a problem. We hire IT people, we train them, they go to different courses abroad for 5 years and then just leave and go to a private sector where the wages are better, so we lose them. We train them and then we lose them. Now, this is the last question because we'd already run out of time, but this is a question about the sort of the private sector. Madam Tyrol, you talked about the private sector, and I'd like to ask you to elaborate and give some time for the others to think about their answers. How could private sector contribute to more efficient combating of economic crime? What are, sort of in practical terms, what is the support that you would need from the private sector? Of course, the trust is very low, especially the public trust to the public bodies, at least compared to other developed countries. It's rather low here in Latvia, and now everybody might have questions about what sort of cooperation is even possible between the private sector and the public sector. Well, let me put it this way. I think that it's in the interest of the private sector to deal with this problem, because tax evasion creates problems for the sector. The big companies that are sort of clean and pristine and honest, they are interested in not having, the black sheep in the family. So basically you go to the big companies or the big players or the industry leaders. Well, we don't really go to the big fish. They see it themselves, they lose in procurements because of cheating, those cheaters, they offer lower prices and you lose procurement, or you lose a tender. So there have been different private initiatives. They've come to us. For example, the construction companies have come to us, and we have, discussed with them the sort of the construction site logbooks, and you need to, also sort of buzz in and buzz out as you come to the construction site, and that would allow us to control the sort of hours worked, and that would allow us to see whether the taxes are paid for the whole amount of hours worked and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to Mechanical Engineering Association and the reverse VAT, they themselves basically calculated the losses stemming from illegal practices, and they came to Ministry of Finance and they asked us to apply the reverse VAT. We've worked also with textile industry as well. Textile industry leaders have also given us a CBA, and they've given us precise figures of what the raw material costs are, what the labor costs are, and so on and so forth, for us to be able to do the math. So joint controls, that's one thing, statistics figures, information data, and training, and their participation in legislative initiatives. Okay, very nice and very concise. Honourable Justice, do you see any ways of private sector contributing to the Supreme Court work? I don't really, apart from them not, appearing before us, but otherwise, they can't really help. They could report more, of course, and that's probably the only way. Yes, PGO, I don't think that the private sector can help PGO on a daily basis, but looking at what we do, judging from what we do, we need to somehow, work with the civic consciousness, if you will. We hear a lot of accusations or allegations of lengthy trials and inefficient prosecution, but my colleagues know that very often people just ignore the summons when they are called in to provide a witness statement. Mostly they never respond to the first, summons or to the first invitation. They're either on vacation or somewhere else or busy or something else. So basically people are not cooperative. They don't come to us. They don't cooperate with us. People need to provide the witness statements, but they try to dodge them, at any possible instance. And, we have different offences that have been unreported as well. Take, for example, Scandinavia. Scandinavia, if you see a neighbor who's not been working, he's unemployed for 10 years, but is building a house, has bought a new, convertible, then it's immediately reported. In Latvia, nothing happens. You can build a new house, buy a new car, grill biggest steak, in the backyard, and nobody will report on you, although you've been unemployed for 10 years. And, many, many times because of the failure of witnesses to appear in court, and hearings are postponed, my prosecutor goes to court and returns in an hour. I see this every day because witness is missing. Because witness thinks, once I've testified to the police, that's it. I don't have to go to court anymore. But unfortunately, our laws, require witnesses to appear in court as well for the evidence to be properly heard. It's good that you've mentioned it, because otherwise, shit of paradigms would be just a loud statement. Thanks for specifying it. Mr. Balsko, what's your opinion? I should say that we have very high tolerance to economic crime. To avoid tax is okay. To smoke smuggled cigarettes is okay, although the excise tax hasn't been paid. How can private sector help? Well, they need to report. Basically, a sort of a whistleblowing function should be fulfilled by the general public. And, this is more a joke from a strategic planner's point of view, but what are the best ways to boost the statistics of figures? Just stop registering or stop collecting the figures. That's the best way. Well, that's not exactly what we do. But I'm saying, how could private sector contribute to your efforts? Well, I can agree to Mr. Balsko. Just report, blow your whistle. And whistleblowing is something that really helps. Either, an involved party, a victim, or a competitor, rival, can blow the whistle, and they can also provide us, the specifics of the case. That enables us to sort of deal with the case a lot more efficiently. Is it a big problem? I'm just looking at the statistics of the insolvency cases lately, and we see that the victims of those insolvency cases, and this is about the public bodies, and I will not mention in which sectors, who know very well what is happening and know even the names and the faces, and the suspects are there already, but no progress. Is that the problem? Well, I'd been the head of the administration only 2 months, but I've encountered 2 cases already. There's one case where everyone knows that it will end in nothing. We know that will end in nothing because they have very strong lawyers who are also influential, who can also influence the outcomes of the case or the ruling. And we sort of traced back the whole offense, and we saw that most probably it was an inside source or an information that we couldn't have otherwise discovered. I don't know how this insider got to the information, how they stole and copied those documents, but those documents were extremely useful to us. So, Madam Rosa, what do you think? Can private sector help? Yes, definitely can help. We also benefit hugely from whistleblowers, like any other law enforcement agency. And the whistleblowing is not where it should end. They should also assist the investigation and the prosecution afterwards as well. It's because quite often we see that people report and then disappear. And yes, that's exactly what we see. I have reported on companies that have evaded tax, and I have given the figures. Yes, but you see, that's not enough. We need additional evidence to prosecute the case successfully. And we need, therefore, constant cooperation of those whistleblowers, not only give us figures and names, So basically, what you expect from the people is to get engaged closer, not only report, give figures and names, but also, assist otherwise. And afterwards, Ilse, we need to finish and we need to leave. This is a very interesting discussion, and I have plenty of questions. We're already late, but we came back from the coffee break later. But Ilse, a short recap of what should we do next? Well, I'm not really the one who speaks concisely, but talks concisely, but we're already over time. In overtime, sorry. Now, what concerns reporting, yes, and whistleblowing, it is very important, not to ignore the offences. If you see an offence, like Mr. Meester said, if you see that somebody who's been unemployed for a decade has some kind of legal income and is not shy about it, do report those people. But on the other hand, you have to earn trust. And sometimes the feeling that you get is that when you whistleblow, you don't really feel that you will be protected. And if there's lack of this protection, then you rather tend to ignore things than report if you know that you'll not be safe or will not be protected. Now the question that we've raised also through our recommendations, why is whistleblowers law being dragged on by different, bodies, and, this is a sort of an old argument, but nevertheless, whistleblowing law should be one of the priorities of the gentlemen and ladies here in the panel, because that would indeed, provide those safeguards and the protections of whistleblowers that we do need and which actually prevent us from whistleblowing. Now, when it comes to PGO, we can help you, and I have an example for that. Apart from, sort of keeping your members on the straight and narrow. But yes, there's one more thing that we sort of initiated last year, but we were, stopped in our tracks. Basically, what we said was that if you don't have the money, if you don't have the people, you don't have the IT wizards, and if it takes you so long to conduct a forensic IT analysis, it brings you back, basically nothing, you come out empty-handed. Maybe we should create some kind of a victim fund, where we could contribute the money that could be then used to hire experts. And we were told, no, that's no way, that would be an undue intervention of public sort of into the work of the public administration. But that would be a very nice innovation, and by that I just wanted to underline that, I'd like to encourage everyone to think about the innovation also on the sort of side of the prosecution as well. And people are getting smarter and smarter. Private sector is getting smarter and smarter, and we know about different threats, and we get different trainings, and we are getting smarter. So there is indeed a very, very practical way we could contribute to efficient work of the judiciary system in general. Now, qualifications, competence, knowledge is something that has to be addressed very seriously. We need to have the competent people on all levels, public bodies that report the cases to the police, and we have to have good people in the police as well, and then the prosecution and the court. But the way I see it, I see that you also have different opinions on what needs to be done, and when it comes to the private sector, something that we also have to agree on is that the current funding does not allow to efficiently prosecute economic and financial crime. I suppose that everyone has to agree that there's going to be no efficiency with given funding. And as we see, at the risk of becoming very unpopular and even hated, but well-funded economic crime or financial crime unit would be very profitable endeavor for the whole country. But indeed, this is about the prosecution, an unavoidable prosecution. This is something that we have to, make people realize, and the speed of investigation is very important. And white-collar crime should be limited to 3 years. Conviction should be achieved in 2-3 years. So thank you, Ilse. An economic and financial crime units should also learn from state revenue services. And, state revenue services are very good at getting the money from the budget. If you give us the money, we'll yield you, we'll give you back the same amount of taxes collected. But these are very serious things, although I'm joking, but you need to see the sunny side in all the difficult things as well, because otherwise you would get depressed and you just want to end your life. But we've talked about a very important thing here about whistleblowers protection, because that would really encourage private sector to help prosecution. We have several questions that we didn't manage to ask. If you want us to report on a neighbor, so the top question is, should anyone prove the origin of their sources, and if not, if they are unable to show the origin of their sources, should those assets be seized? There's another question that has been up there for a while on the insolvency. What are the maximum penalties that can be applied to these insolvency practitioners? Well, there are many questions, but I hope that panel discussion at least answered some of the questions that you've had and gave you a sense of where it's all headed. So let's do it then. Thank you.